Okay, good evening, and welcome to the special board meeting. We are calling the meeting to order at 7:08, and may I have a roll call, please? Here. Here.
Yep. Yep.
Here. Get everybody? Okay. Tonight, the core team is going to unveil some concepts to us to help us think about our school facilities. So we're all very excited about it. And I want to take this time to really sincerely thank the core team members for the work that they put into the Future Ready project. This board recognizes the amount of time that you've committed so far, and we appreciate all the work you are about to put in as you continue this process. I know it's just begun. It is important to remember that this process has really just begun. The concepts that are being presented are purely that, concepts. A lot of thought and consideration have been put into these ideas. Nothing's been decided. It is merely a presentation to the board and our community to take a temperature check and get a sense of all the possibilities for our facilities. As a person who absolutely hates change, I know some of the concepts may seem initially contrary to what education represents to us in Winnetka. My youngest child just finished Greeley last year. I have very fond memories of my children's elementary school experiences. It's hard for me to fathom our schools any different than they are today. However, time is marching ahead, and so must we. The core team, this board, and our administration are taking on the daunting task of figuring out what to do with our aging buildings in light of declining enrollment and involving educational pedagogy. I hate that word. We are approaching this yeoman's task with transparency, fiscal responsibility, and teaching and learning at the forefront. So with that said, public comment. We are requesting that public comment be held until following tonight's presentation. If there is anyone that must speak at this time, we ask that you gather on the far right side of the auditorium for your public comment opportunity. Prior to your public comment, please state your name for the record and honor the 3-minute time limit. We do not want to inform those in attendance that any board meeting is a meeting, I guess we want to inform these in attendance, that any board meeting is a meeting of the board held in public, and therefore the board will listen to all statements and questions, but we do not interact or respond at this time. Also, do know that this is the first time that we are hearing this presentation. However, if a response to your request is desired, please be sure to include that information on the sign-in sheets. Please note that there are additional opportunities both at the end of this week and next to interact with the core team and administration. Thank you. Jim Wyatt?
Good evening, my name is Jim Wyatt of the 1240 Winnetka Drive. The financial subcommittee of the school board developed a very important philosophy several years ago. We believe a long-term educational excellence is based on the following principle. When the schools don't need money, the community can trust the school board not to ask for it. When the schools do need money, the school board will trust the community to provide it. Recent newsletters reported on ideas being discussed for the Future Ready plan. Pianos scattered around the building, a giant slide from the second floor to the first floor, windows whose tint can be changed with an iPhone. None of these sound like needs to me. None of them sound like they will improve the educational outcomes for our students. I believe taxpayers will continue to support needed maintenance expenses and upgraded HVAC systems. But it's obvious that this board is considering a major referendum, which I believe will not be supported by taxpayers. The administration and the board need to understand the following facts. District 36 already has the highest cost per student of any neutral feeder district. And enrollment continues to plummet. Projected enrollment is down almost 27% from 2006. While Glencoe is down 13% and Wilmette is down only 2% over the exact same time period. According to a recent article by The Patch, Winnetka's real estate market has suffered more than any of the other feeder districts. When fewer families want to enroll here, all of our housing values will continue to lag. Trump plan, the new Trump tax plan, I'm sorry, makes each incremental tax dollar 35% more expensive for every village resident. It was just a year ago when the board agreed to pay off the existing expensive debt from our last ill-conceived referendum that the board was actively discussing lowering costs by closing Skokie School. While you may believe a shiny new school will draw students to our district, I believe it will have the exact opposite effect. Winnetka's expensive homes and high taxes already make it very difficult to attract parents with school-aged children to our community, and an expensive new referendum will make it almost impossible. Traditional skill acquisition is no longer our main goal in education. It is putting these skills to use to solve relevant problems that has become essential for our students' future success. So say the principals from all 3 elementary schools. Yet I'm worried that this kind of rhetoric will deter young families with children from our community. Our students will never solve relevant problems until they master the basic skills, something they seem to struggle with based on what we're seeing from District 36 test scores and placement alumni at New Trier. Many parents seem to recognize these shortcomings based on the crowds at Mathnasium, wait lists at area private schools, or moving families out of the district. The administration, I believe, should stop focusing on spending our poor academic results and should focus on hiring the best teachers possible. Good teachers and a solid curriculum are the real key to a great educational experience, not brand new well-lit buildings with slides. I think you should close Skokie as you discussed a year ago, redistrict in order to balance K through 5 through 3 elementary schools, and send grades 6 through 8 here to Washington. The administration and the board need to address the root causes of declining enrollment, not to waste taxpayer dollars.
Great, thank you. Okay, anybody else? This is it. Okay, so without further ado, core team, we're trading places with you. The floor is yours.
Yes, we are actually going to start before we shift spots. The board will eventually move to the front row here so they can actually see the presentation. I am going to call up Bonnie Sanborn. She's a member of the DLR group who've been helping facilitate this process, and she's going to just quickly lead us through the online polling just to get some demographic information. We see this great turnout tonight. We want to know who's in attendance, and it'll help us with our future communication and understanding of who's been able to make it this evening. So thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Tricia, and thanks everybody for having us with you tonight. If you have not yet downloaded and installed the Turning Point app on your phone, there are people circulating in the audience who can help, so raise your hand if you need assistance, and we have several people who can come by and assist you with that. If you do not have a cell phone or a device that can run the app, there are iPads in the back of the auditorium that you can stand and use for the live poll. There are 3 questions.
The Wi-Fi is future ready D36 with no password.
No password, it's right here.
And if you have an iPhone, you can just hold your camera up to the QR code and it'll open directly to where you can download the app.
What's the session ID?
There is none, you just skip that.
You will not.
Oh, sorry,
The session ID is coming. I want to make sure everybody has the
The
app
next part
first.
you can skip. We just want to make sure everybody has the app first.
If you still need help, please raise your hand up so the people helping can find you. There's somebody over here. I'm going to move this over to the session ID slide. For those of you who are ready, there's no need to enter the user information. Just hit submit. The screen will say polling is closed. It will remain blank until the poll starts. I see a hand in the back here.
For anyone standing in the back, there are some additional seats in the front.
All right, I'm going to place the first question up here on the screen. A lot of you showed up tonight. It sounds like we're having some Wi-Fi problems.
It's just everybody hitting it at once. It is going, you just have to be patient.
So for those of you who couldn't hear Maureen, she says we need to be patient. We will get through the Wi-Fi.
It's just everybody hitting it at the same time. Good, good. I have more iPads up here.
In the interest of time, I've been asked to go to the first polling question. This is demographic data only. So the first question will be the role you most identify with tonight. It looks like over half of you have been able to answer, so I've been asked to move it forward. I apologize for the session being full. There are a lot of people here tonight. We have 120 responses right now, so.
Why don't we do it once and do it again? It's just demographic.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move forward.
Does anyone know what the password was for the Wi-Fi? There's no password.
No, just get your ID 36. What does it matter?
All right, like any good risk taking, the large crowd wanted to get some demographic information, but clearly this isn't going quite as planned. So I think we're gonna, we have some idea at least of who's here, but we're gonna move forward on this. If you can just move forward, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jennifer Pelkey, and I am a member of the core team and of the school board. The core team represents a diverse perspective. It is comprised of community members, teachers, and administrators. We were charged with examining enrollment balancing, our aging facilities, and our vision of teaching and learning. Throughout this process, we also consulted with Jason Lamke and Bonnie Sanborn of the DLR Group, the design firm presented to this community and chosen as a resource for this process. As a core team, we worked many hours to reflect, deliberate, and review educational-based research, which you will learn more about this evening. As some of you may remember, the enrollment balancing process began in early 2017 due to the enrollment imbalance among our 3 elementary schools. Nearly 45% of our elementary students were attending Crow Island, which represents a 160 student difference between schools. This is the largest discrepancy in enrollment balancing since record-taking began in 1961. The enrollment balancing committee grappled with addressing the imbalance and learned that our facility limitations were compounding the issue. Regardless of how we balanced enrollment, we still had facility issues such as lacking KW and cafeteria space for many of our children. While a short-term solution was adopted to temporarily relieve the enrollment imbalance by placing all kindergarten students at Hubbard Woods and Greeley, the overarching goal was clearly for the board to lay out a comprehensive plan to address long-term and optimal solutions for our schools, a plan that addresses enrollment, facilities, and vision for teaching and learning. After the District 36 facilities were assessed this past summer, the core team was created and developed a deep understanding of our current facilities and enrollment. For instance, you can see that we are in declining enrollment right now, but historically, there is a chance of rebounding. We need to address the volatility in our enrollment, and most importantly, we want to advance our vision for teaching and learning. We spent a great deal of time examining the relationship between space and learning. With research and vision in hand, we work to develop concepts that will inspire a community conversation and result in a plan that works. Our goal tonight is to share a continuum of options for consideration. Your voice matters and we value your input. As the core team move forward, we will continue to listen to all stakeholders, gather information, and we will present a refined plan this June. I'm now going to hand it over to our superintendent, Dr. Tricia Kosanda.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right. Well, it is terrific to see so many people here this evening. We have been working hard, and we are eager to launch our concepts and to share with you our thinking and what we've learned. You will hear from a number of our core team members tonight. It's important to hear from our teachers and administrators, and of course, our community members and parents. To start, I want to provide a helpful framework for your expectations this evening. And so the board will be presented with concepts and options, not fully developed solutions or positions this evening. The board will also, and the community, will see some visuals to help conceptualize some of the ideas and make sense of them. So please don't mistake the images and videos as blueprints or designs. The board will also be provided with relative cost structures rather than finely tuned project budgets. And as Jennifer talked about, we will share a continuum of 3 concepts with you this evening, and then engage. This is a launch, as we've said over and over. We will engage you. We have tonight we'll hear from our board at the board meeting, but we do have a meeting scheduled for Friday morning, next Thursday night, and many more throughout the course of the spring and into early summer. There will be a lot of information that we'll share with you. We work to summarize it into a handout that will be available to you as you walk out this evening. So I know you will take notes, but just know we also will have a handout for you. The flow of the presentation will begin with the why. What are we solving for? So Jennifer already explained to you a little bit about the enrollment imbalance and the overall decline in enrollment and the volatility of enrollment. We also want to share a little bit more about our facilities and vision for teaching and learning. So I encourage everyone to listen to this information with an open mind, work collaboratively with the district to refine the direction, and engage in a productive and civil problem-solving process. It's an opportunity to show our children how discourse and democracy can be activated to reach a positive outcome. So this does not look future ready, obviously. But as we honor our past to plan for our future, we do need to remind ourselves of the ambitious culture that we have in the Winnetka Public Schools. The first school board that formed in the late 1800s formed with a vision to provide a public school experience that rivaled the local private schools. They cared so much about that in 1919, they recruited a young superintendent, Carlton Washburn, who was a disruptor. He came and wanted to disrupt the traditional schooling model and introduce the progressive model. This led to an amazing prestige and success that lives with us today. And of course, we also had the 1940 opening of Crow Island School, the first school designed for young students around an educational philosophy. Tonight, I share that with you just to provide an opportunity for you, that this is our chance and opportunity again to be aspirational and to think about what could be. But we also need to start with an honest assessment of our needs and facilities. Here's an image of our 5 current school buildings, and here are their ages. Greeley's our oldest at 105, closely followed by Hubbard Woods at 103, Skokie's nearly 100, and then we have Crow Island at 78, and Washburn, our youngest, at 49. The national average for school ages the age of school buildings is 44. So the question is, well, what? We have old buildings, there's old houses, this happens, but how much does it cost to repair our 5 buildings, and how does it impact our current needs? So I'm going to welcome Brad Goldstein, our CFO, to the podium to share a little bit about the costs.
Tricia. Again, I'm Brad Goldstein, Chief Financial Officer for District 36. In July, we engaged DLR Group to complete the first phase of this master facility plan process by surveying all of our buildings to assess their physical condition. This involved evaluating everything from cosmetic items to the building mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, and this resulted in finding 1,364 items that they recommended we address. These range from a $5 doorknob to a crack in a terrazzo tile, or a roof or windows. As you can imagine, the range is very wide. We then engaged a third-party cost estimator, Amoresco, to cost these items out based on a 2018 cost, and this totaled $22.4 million, and this does not factor in inflation. We also had them break this down into 4 different categories so that we could look at how many items were priority and what items were merely cosmetic. As you can see, $13.5 million in items are related to health, life, and safety. These are critical items that are categorized by priority that should be addressed within 3 to 5 years, and some of them within 12 months. The heating, ventilation, and air conditioning category comes in at $3.1 million, and this does not include addressing areas without air conditioning. It only addresses units currently in place that may be nearing the end of life, or boiler plants and piping related to the HVA system. Accessibility is another major issue we need to address. This category totals $4.4 million. Having older buildings that were built prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act means our buildings are not up to code, and that we need to address these in order to provide equal access to our facilities for all. Cosmetic items comprise the smallest portion of this list at $1.3 million and can be moved down the priority list, but we did want to include them as they should be addressed. This brings us to our $22.4 million total, just to bring our items up to par with the condition we would expect in our facilities. This again does not address adding air conditioning to areas that currently do not have them. If we were to look at adding air conditioning to the areas that do not have them, and this excludes Carlton Washburn, which is fully air conditioned, this would bring the total cost anywhere to from $33.7 million to $38.2 million, depending on which solution we would choose to address this issue. I would like to emphasize the fact that air conditioning isn't the only deficiency related to thermal comfort in our buildings that needs to be addressed. There are many students at home or staff here that could tell you that in the fall and spring, we have issues in our buildings as well. The fluctuation in temperatures from a 20-degree day to a 55-degree day can wreak havoc in an older building, as you cannot move from boiler heat to air conditioning in a heartbeat like we can at home. So a cold day followed by a warm day can cause teachers and students to layer up and then unlayer as the day goes along to tackle the indoor conditions. Just Friday, I was outside of Crow Island surveying with the PTO, and we saw a window cracked open, and that was because it was very hot inside the building. It acts like a terrarium with the large windows, and so those kind of conditions are happening, and they're not ideal learning conditions. It is also important to note that these items listed do not address any reconfiguration of our buildings to make them future ready, or add any safety or security features, which would range from $3.5 to $4.5 million. Just to give you a sense of what it costs to maintain our aging infrastructure, during the past 11 years, we have spent just shy of $29 million on capital projects, excluding renovations and additions. This helps us give us confidence in the numbers we just shared with you from our cost estimators, since this encompasses many items that have long lifespans, such as boilers, roofs, but others that may need to be replaced sooner, such as carpet, vinyl tile, or skylights, which have a lifespan of about 10 to 15 years. Those items that do have a longer lifespan, such as boilers, may have items that need maintenance during their life cycle as well, before the 30-year life cycle is complete. These are capital projects that are typically done during the summer. These projects, again, include carpet, tile, roofs, windows, boiler replacement, and other big-ticket items to ensure our buildings are as in good shape as we could expect for 50 to 100-year-old buildings. With the $22.4 million from the other slide that would spread out over at least the next 5 years, you can see that this would total anywhere from $51.3 million on the low end to $67.1 million if we were to add air conditioning. Safety and security upgrades are another piece that we had mentioned, which would be included in this. If we were to move forward with air conditioning, the cost range is about $38.2 million in total. And again, the total at the bottom on the high end, $67.1 million, just to bring our buildings up to where we expect them to be and add air conditioning. To put these costs in perspective, our annual budget for our operating fund is just over $40 million. I will now ask Dr. Cassandra to come up again and share some of our building limitations.
The next question is now, we have a little more information on the cost. Is how well do our buildings meet our current needs and aspirations? I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the operational limitations, and then Kelly Tess, our principal at Skokie, will come and talk about educational impact. So I'm going to highlight 4. The first is, just seems kind of a practical matter. We, at our middle schools, students do stay at school for lunch. And at the elementary, our schools, when they were built, students went home for lunch. And that was still the case for the majority of the students, even about 10 years ago. But currently, about 85% of our students remain in the elementary schools during lunchtime. Really, they're benefited by having a recent addition of a cafeteria to house those students. But at Crow Island and Hubbard Woods, students eat lunch in foyers or auditoriums or classrooms. So this is less than ideal, especially as a midday break, so to speak, as well. We've even had quiet rooms for lunch because kids sometimes, do need to decompress at times. So there isn't adequate facilities for that, or for, which you'll hear a little bit more about later, kitchen prep. Before and after school care is also growing in popularity. We have more and more families choosing to have their students provide after and before school care. We just announced we've been housing that at Crow Island, but we're running out of space there. And so we're moving that program over to Skokie to accommodate the larger group. Brad mentioned the lack of ADA accessibility. Given the age of our buildings, a lot of that needs to be retrofit. It is imperative and mission critical that everyone can enter our buildings as community members, but especially as students and as teachers, whether it be a permanent disability or a short-term disability such as crutches. We do need to address this. The district has been making incremental upgrades, but we still have a fair amount of accommodations on our to-do list, as you heard, over $4 million. So challenges range from accessing a school's front door to accessibility of playgrounds and restrooms. So again, this is mission critical to address these. Inadequate thermal comfort. This came out as a priority in our staff survey. This is 4 of our schools lack universal air conditioning. Washburn, the school we're in tonight, is the only school that has universal air conditioning. But as Brad mentioned, we also have unreliable or overactive heating issues where it's not unusual to see students in tank tops in January. There is an impact on learning, and our teachers have said this, parents have said this, students have said this. On the hot days, we've done some analysis that ranges to about 10% of our days are considered high temperature, where we enact our cooling relief plan, where students are moved throughout the day out of hot rooms into cooling centers, such as usually the resource center, so they get some relief. And teachers will report tired children in the afternoon, decreased attention spans, a shift for KW staff, obviously, from physical activities, and just a general disruption of the school day. And then the last is high demand for community use. Schools should absolutely be a hub for community use, and we're proud of that. Our spaces are rented all of the time, whether it be our theaters, our auditoriums, our field space, our even meeting and learning space. We have fan events, and they're rented by the village, the park district, and private groups. There is a demand for this and an opportunity in this future ready process to see what are some of the needs of the park district or the village, and how can we think about making sure that we have facilities that can support our community and see our schools continue as the hub. So future ready is really an opportunity to address some of these deficiencies that do limit and are in most obviously updated or renovated school systems, this would be taken care of. So I'm going to pass the presentation, as I said, over to Kelly Tess at Skokie, our principal at Skokie School, to share this piece of the presentation. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Tricia said, my name is Kelly Tess. I'm the principal at Skokie. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the educational limitations that come along with a limited building. So we put together a list of some of the things that have changed or evolved in the last 10 years in public education. All of these are things that we as public educators are required to provide our students, initiatives that have been put in place. And so all of these have implications of space and how you utilize space to provide these things for students. So not to go through all of these, there's 5 that I'd like to highlight and just talk a little bit about how they impact space in a school. Increased specialized services. So certainly over the last 10 years, probably more than that, we've seen an increase in the types of specialists that are present in our schools. So that could be everything from a speech pathologist to a social worker to an interventionist that's providing extra support in reading or math. All of these spaces require additional classroom space, office space for these providers, but also quiet, sometimes confidential space to support a student. Certainly technology is a huge focus in the last 10 years, if not more, certainly in the last 5. Our students at Skokie are one-to-one, so they all have iPads with them throughout the day. That requires a space for storage when they're not in use, a space for charging. In addition to that, something that you might not necessarily think about is the power that your building provides for these items. When Skokie was built in 1920 and completed in 1921, at least the first phase, iPads weren't a part of the consideration. So the number of outlets that we have present in our classrooms is minimal compared to perhaps a newer build, certainly compared to Washburn. We will very often see on warm days, this has been talked about already, when our fans are running to keep our kids and our staff cool, the north end of our building, which is the original wing of Skokie, will experience brownouts throughout that day, because our internal power grid was not designed to support that level of power. So it certainly comes with technology, but also the use of more power throughout our school day. Health and wellness refers to physical education. Physical education is definitely, it goes beyond now the use of a gym. So our teachers are requiring instructional space to teach kids, but also health and wellness rooms. So we are utilizing at Skokie what were once the girls' and boys' locker rooms at one time for a fitness center. So we have treadmills and step machines that are up there available for kids to use. They are on what could be considered the 3rd floor of Skokie, so you can imagine the temperature in those spaces on warm days. But also, each of those spaces are totally repurposed and something that we're getting by with to be able to provide our students with the things that we're required to provide as public educators. We talked about lunch already, the difference between a lunchroom and a cafeteria being that a cafeteria includes a kitchen space, so food preparation. Our schools do not have, with the exception of Washburn, kitchens available for food preparation. So as we're seeing more and more students attend the lunch period at school, space is certainly something to contend with. And then finally, least restrictive environments refers to special education. There are a number of legal parameters in place that make it so that we are required to expose students requiring extra support to as much interaction with their general education peers as possible, which means you need both a large classroom space for whole group, and you also need smaller intervention space for some of those smaller group supports. I'm going to read a quote to you, and then I'll reveal when and what it's from. With the exception of Crow Island, all existing schools are over 40 years old. Their original designs do not lend themselves to expansion in accordance with present-day student groupings and learning activities. So obviously that 40 years old part gives it away. But interestingly enough, we find ourselves in a very similar position. This was in 1965 from the Winnetka Public School Board when they were considering building Washburn School, where you are seated today. So very similar position, with the exception of the fact that Crow Island is the one that does not have the space. I'm going to talk a little bit about what a future-ready classroom space looks like, and then I'd like to pass it over to some of our teachers to hear from their perspective. But just to give you a little bit of a visual, this is a view from Sunset Ridge in Northfield, just newly constructed. This is a multi-purpose space that serves as a cafeteria, it serves as their auditorium, it can serve as a community meeting space, and it is the central portion of the school. So when you enter the school through the front doors, this is the first space that you see. What you can't necessarily see in this picture is that right at about the line where the tables are, there are accordion doors that will pull shut so that the top half of the picture can be turned into a traditional auditorium space. So those are tiered seated sections, and there are more traditional auditorium chairs that will go in that space. The center section turns into a cafeteria, and then these steps that you see at the bottom portion of the picture are actually tiered seating areas, so that the entire district, which is significantly smaller than ours, there's 2 schools, is able to come together in this space to have a community meeting. So what you see in this picture is flexible space. So not only furniture that can easily be moved and reconfigured, but a space itself that can be physically reconfigured for the needs of the event. This is a picture of the Resource Center at Westmore Elementary School in Northbrook, Illinois. This was a renovated space. So in this space you can see certainly height, you can see acoustic panels that were put in place to manage the sound in this space. You also see flexible furniture. There's clearly a classroom or project area toward the back. You have quiet seating areas, a circulation desk, and then obviously storage for books. Wanted to share this picture with you because the Resource Center tends to be the hub or the central part of the school. All of the students visit it, the teachers certainly use it. And so a space that is flexible and able to be used by a variety of different groups is something that we would be looking for in a future-ready space. To give you a definition of what future-ready means, a learning environment that allows for student leadership, collaboration, and independence while providing equitable opportunity and resources to multiple learning types in multiple subject areas. This requires flexible, adaptable space that can mold to the needs of a classroom in a timely, accessible, and quiet way without compromising a teacher's ability to supervise, facilitate, and support students. So, the question here is, what would our learning spaces look like if they were designed to meet the needs of today's learners and teachers? And to speak a little bit more to this, I'd like to invite Bird Ryan, Kim Wendell, and Steve Agaritis, 3 teachers from our district, to speak more about this.
Good evening. My name is Kim Wendell, and I have been a teacher in the district for 20 years here at Washburn. Tonight, Bird, Steve, and I are here to talk to you about the 3rd goal this group considered as we began our investigation into what a future-ready District 36 might look like and how it might impact our teaching and our students' learning. In District 36, teachers' commitment to providing child-centered education, which meets both the academic and social-emotional needs of each child, remains constant. However, as we look ahead to the future, one of our goals would be to continue to be leaders in education. Additionally, Progressive 2.0, Future Ready Teaching and Learning, would give us the opportunity to expand experiential opportunities for our students, infuse relevant, real-world hands-on work, harness 21st century technology, tools, and knowledge, and prepare students for lifelong success. While teachers do the best with what we have, our current facilities limit our ability to best meet the needs of every child and to collaborate with our colleagues. We would like to share with you a few examples.
Hi. My name's Bird Ryan, and I teach 4th grade at Hubbard Woods Elementary School. I've been a proud teacher in this district since 2012. One of the pillars of our district is that we believe in child-centered education. What is that? What does that look like? Our students come to us with different learning styles, a range of strengths and weaknesses, different emotional needs, and of course, different readiness for learning. In order to meet all of these children where they are and create growth and achievement for the whole child, we use differentiation of instruction. One of my frustrations in differentiating my instruction has been in my existing classroom layout. Creating collaborative spots for small group work is challenging. For instance, each year I have students that come to me with different math abilities. Some students might not need the planned direct instruction of a concept, so I like to stretch them by giving them a challenge that involves the same concept. These challenges usually entail a learning style that uses collaborative thinking and bouncing ideas off of each other, discussing solutions. If I have them working at the back table, their discussion interferes with my instruction that's going on right next to them. Ideally, I would send them to an adjoining space. I don't have this. The hall is not really an option as I can't supervise them. And as you see, recently, the slide on the left is my class, and I had an associate in the room, so I was able to do some supervising, and I tried to have a group work in the hall, and there's a class going by, and the coats and the boots, and there's the project is the stuff that they're working with there on the floor. To meet the needs of a wide range of learners, we need a wide range of learning spaces. And here on the other side, you'll see that there's a future-ready learning spaces, both for individual small, collaborative group work. What you can't see is that there's actually a large glass wall, sort of where the picture divider is, and the teacher's in the classroom with the majority of the students. So she can supervise, and yet they're able to be separate and do their different things. I'm going to pass it back to Kim.
So Bird gave you a glimpse of some of the challenges that teachers face in the elementary buildings, and I wanted to share with you an example of what Progressive 2.0 looks like in the middle school and some of the challenges that I face. So inspired by the incredible experience that we had in the fall when Arun Gandhi came to speak to our students, he inspired the kids to be the change they wish to see in the world. And so with that idea in mind, my social studies partner and I asked our students when we returned from school after winter break, what will you do this year to change the world? We asked the kids to start with generating a list of problems that concern them. And from that list of problems, they are worried about a wide range of things. They investigated childhood obesity. They investigated food waste. They investigated the lack of clean water in parts of the world. As you can see, Ashton and Will and Quinn are working right there to identify places in the world where water is toxic and where water is clean. One of the topics that kids were especially concerned about was animal cruelty. And so, let's see, I'm not sure if the slide's going to show this or not. No, okay, back it up. So the idea with the project was intended to be an interdisciplinary mix of both the language arts concepts that I needed to teach, which included research-based argument, the social studies concept, which my social studies partner needed to teach around the progressive era prior to World War I, and then have the kids go through the research process and actually take it to action. So last Friday, we actually embarked on our first experience getting out of the school. The kids raised over $500 selling candygrams for Valentine's Day, raising a variety of money, and as well as bringing in bleach, paper towels, and things like that. We traveled to a nearby animal shelter where the kids had an opportunity to play with some of the animals and also to help, to actually help with some of the food storage and things like that. It was a really incredible experience. However, whoops, there go the cards. Okay, I'm just going to talk. Some of the challenges that we face in these classrooms include the fact that while Washburn did enjoy a wonderful addition 10 years ago with new gyms and new specialized spaces, we did not, our classrooms did not enlarge, were not enlarged. And so when the kids are working on research and writing and creating posters and creating slideshows and websites and PowerPoint presentations, and I think you can probably click me one more. One more. As you can see in my colleague Maureen Etter's classroom, this is another example of integrated interdisciplinary work going on. You can see that kids are working on a variety of things, and it's pretty crowded. While our elementary buildings are crowded in a different way, our physical classrooms are crowded because our kids' bodies are bigger. And so what really happens on a daily basis is similar to what Bert described, where when I teach my lesson, we're all in our physical classroom, but as soon as it's time to get to work, the kids say, can we go in the hall? They're seeking places where they can spread out, where they can physically move their bodies, where the introverted, more quiet kids can have a quiet space to think. And so those are some of the challenges that we face. Additionally, we lack storage space. In these old academic classrooms, most of them have 4 outlets per room, so like 1 per wall. Another struggle that we have is that we sometimes struggle to hit a Wi-Fi hotspot, so sometimes kids just have to leave the room because they're kind of seeking a spot where they can actually access the internet. Additionally, display space. We lack some display space. So having some flexible walls, and I think that might be a slide back, having some flexible spaces and some wide open spaces where kids could spread out to meet their learning needs would be a better use of our space and would, we think, enhance teaching and learning.
Good evening. My name is Steve Agaritas. I've taught in the district for 21 years, 20 years in that room that you see on the right since the reopening of Skokie in 1998. And if I've taught your children or if they've come across, we, for those 20 years, have worked on a project in architecture where we essentially immerse kids into the roots of the way that we've learned over the years in our district experientially, with a hands-on project where kids get to plan, design, and eventually build a future apartment. So one day I was walking down our hall and walked by a photo that I've seen 1,000 times over our hall monitor's desk, and the photo on the left was that photo. And I kind of just stopped, and I just kind of said, wait, I've seen this. Like literally I just saw this, because in my room, you can obviously make your own judgment, you know, kids working with their hands, incorporating the concepts that we've integrated in mathematics to be able to produce a product has not changed, nor has the facility. Because if you also notice, things look a lot the same. So what's interesting is these photos are separated by 100 years, where a lot of things are very much the same, which is a good and maybe not so good thing. What will be interesting is the next 100 years and what that photo might turn out to be. Thank you, and actually, Kelly will speak next about configuration research that she's done.
So Julie and I are going to share just a couple of pieces of additional information that the core team gathered in order to arrive at the concepts. So that's 2 more people before the concepts. I know this is what you're all waiting for. So we did some research as a core team. There was a subgroup that assembled in November and December to look at what studies, if any, were out there, and there were. We were able to find about 40 of them about grade level configuration and what the implications of those different configurations might mean. So through the research that we found, there were some strong themes that arose. One of them being the vulnerability of the middle school years, which is probably something that we all know, having experienced it. However, this was in relationship to grade level configuration. So very often when you see grade level configurations that split up grades K through 8, you will see that transition happening in the middle school years. So from 5th to 6th, possibly 4th to 5th, or 6th to 7th, like we have here in Winnetka. And what the research pointed out is that this is not only a transition, a physical transition from one building to another, one school community to another, but a point in a child's life when they're experiencing a lot of their own personal transitions. So they're going through adolescence, they're experiencing a lot of change and trying to navigate that on their own, and that when you add on a transition from one school to another during these vulnerable years, that can lead to some negative side effects. So some of those things that were mentioned in the research were an increase in negative behavior that might require disciplinary action. The research also noted that there is very typically a downturn in achievement in that first year of transition, and it can take up to the second year after that transition to make up that loss, which we have seen over just looking at data between 4th and 5th grade, even 6th to 7th grade here in Winnetka. Tied to that, the perception of the transition is something that students struggle with and their families struggle with. This is something I'm very familiar with as the principal of Skokie. I spent a lot of time in 4th grade classrooms in the spring. I'm trying to help our students adjust to the idea of changing to a different school. Not only changing to a different school, but one they know they will only be in for 2 years. This is something that impacts kids and certainly impacts parents. I've had a lot of conversations with nervous parents, especially those sending their oldest child through Skokie, that are nervous about the change, nervous about the amount of time that they'll have in that building, and that by the time they adjust, they'll be getting ready to switch to Washburn. And by the time they adjust to Washburn, they'll get ready to switch to New Trier, and so on. So that transition is certainly one that comes with some anxiety for both children and adults. The identity of the school community was something that stood out in the research as well. So the notion that you are a part of a community, that you identify as a part of that community is something that is important to students and to families as well, and that the longer you spend in a single school community, the more positive outcomes are associated with that. Finally, the parity of environment and developmental needs. So a classroom space needs to reflect the needs of the students that are within it. The research shows that there is no one-size-fits-all model for a classroom. So if you are building or renovating a space, you need to do that with the notion that you are preparing for a certain level of student, a certain set of developmental needs. So a kindergarten classroom, preparing for 5-year-olds, will need an entirely different type of space and furniture than it would for 8th graders, so a group of 13-year-olds. And you can see that in the pictures, just the sheer size of the child as they grow requires different space. This is an illustration to show some of the neighboring district grade level configurations that exist around us. Some of them are in the township. One of them, Glenview, is not in the township, but I did want to highlight some of the different types of configurations that are out there. So Wilmette, District 39, mirrors the same types of transitions that we have here in Winnetka. It's certainly a larger district, but same type of configuration. Glencoe shifted to grade level centers. So when you're looking at this model, you need to consider the fact that this is a single cohort of students that are moving through these 3 buildings together. That was something that was pointed out in the research, is if the transition is minimized, the impact of the transition, if you're traveling with the same cohort, whereas here in Winnetka, we're merging 3 cohorts together at the Skokie School. Sunset Ridge, we saw pictures of that, K3 and 4-8. Again, you have that cohort impact. Glenview is just a different configuration from primary to more of an intermediate grade level center. And then you have Avoca and Kenilworth. Finally, all of our students that go into New Trier will experience 2 transitions from the freshman campus to Winnetka. This was not always the case, but has been for some time now and will be for the foreseeable future. So in looking at this map, any student that comes into kindergarten in Winnetka and stays through their graduation from New Trier will experience 5 transitions by the time they head off to college. So we are on the high end of transitions, and then we're leaving that to the research. That might not be optimal. The additional consideration is that we do have families in our district right now who have students that have already experienced a transition in kindergarten because of the enrollment imbalance that we attempted to resolve here in the short term. So we may have some students that, if we continue with this configuration, will experience 6 or 7 transitions. Okay, I'm going to hand off to Dr. Julie Pfeffer, principal at Crow Island.
Good evening. As Kelly shared, I'm Julie Pfeffer, and so I wanted to share just some other factors we considered, along with what we have learned about future-ready space needs and also what the research tells us about student transitions. We are also looking at some other very important information. Community and staff input has been and will continue to be a critical guiding force to our work. In January, staff and community members responded to the initial planning survey. On this survey, there were about 8 to 10 items, and respondents were asked to prioritize their top 3. In the staff priorities, we had about 228 staff members respond, and the top 3 staff priorities at that time were class size guidelines, remaining as they are, 58%, future-focused educational design at 46%, and addressing thermal comfort, which was at 44%. On the same survey, we had 724 community members respond. These were the top 3 priorities of our community members at that time. Future-focused educational design with 64%, class size guidelines at 61%, and school safety and security at 36%. Finally, the safety and security of our students and staff members remains our highest priority. It is a thread that is woven through all of our conversations. To this end, we continue to partner with the Winnetka Police and Fire Departments to enhance and improve our safety protocols. In addition, the police and fire departments are already actively involved in our planning process, and all of the concepts that we will be sharing with you tonight have been shared and discussed with both the police and fire departments. Now I would like to hand it off to several of our core team members, and we are going to start sharing some of our concepts with you.
My name is Dave Kim, the principal here at Washburn.
Craig Kopkash, parent and community member.
Stacey Wellman, I'm an educator here in Winnetka for over 20 years.
Kirby Dunan, parent.
Thanks. One of the things that we do know is that since its very inception, this district was designed to meet the needs of our learners. We've seen these lenses throughout the presentation and throughout the year so far as our core team takes a look at our schools. And we know that even when this district began, as far as facilities, we have buildings that were built specifically to meet the sizes and shapes of our students, an enrollment plan that provided equitable enrollment across buildings and ensured appropriate class sizes within those buildings. And of course, even way back then, there was something called the Winnetka plan because they wanted to make sure that they had the appropriate vision for teaching and learning at that time. What we know right now is that we have aging facilities, we have changing enrollment patterns, and we know that there are new opportunities right now for teaching and learning. The core team took a look at all of these lenses, considered input from the community, from teachers, from staff, and from students, looked at the research, and also visited other sites to begin to attempt to answer the question, how should we be designing our district today to meet the needs of today's learners? As the team looked at those questions, they came up with a continuum of concepts, ranging from what we call a baseline concept through maintain, enhance, transform, and reach. Let me talk a little bit about what those mean. Baseline, simple. Let's do nothing. This is who we are today. Let's go ahead and not put air conditioning into buildings. That's okay. This is not a master plan. It does not address any of the teaching and learning needs. But we would still address some of those life safety needs that Brad mentioned earlier. Yes, we would continue to work on boilers and any systems that need to have work done within those buildings. On the other end, reach. Golly, what if every single one of our buildings was brand new and had that air conditioning? What if every single building was designed to be future ready? Obviously, we recognize right off the bat that that cost would exceed our current debt limit. And so we eliminated those bookends as we continue to think about our continuum. And we wanted to explore what's possible and fiscally responsible and what also would advance our teaching and learning. Very simply, maintain is this again. How can our current facilities be updated in a way that accommodates enrollment balancing? Enhance. Can we update our facilities in such a way that we can maintain neighborhood schools and begin to include some future-ready space? And transform. Is there a way to have a complete reconfiguration of the district that would maximize access to future-ready space and minimize any future changes in enrollment issues? As we looked at these three concepts, maintain, enhance, and transform, we're going to take a closer look at that right now. Please do remember that these are conceptual ideas. These are not blueprints. These are thoughtful possibilities. They're not fully developed solutions. As you view each of these three scenarios, we would ask that you think about what are the key attributes of this idea. Is this really a good long-term option and investment? Does this meet our educational goals as a district? And frankly, what's best for your family and for the broader community? We recognize there is much more work to be done, and that's exactly why we need your input. An educational master facilities plan, like Future Ready D36, defines ideas. It is not an architecture or design. Programming, design, construction are separate processes and occur over the lifetime of a master facilities plan. So these are all concepts that we would like to present. As the team looked at those again, they considered these three lenses: back to facilities, enrollment, and vision for teaching and learning. We will return to each of these as we look at the concept. We'll discuss the concept, and we'll take a look at what that concept means for these three items that we've discussed and the impact on these three. So the first concept we'll be looking at, and each concept, by the way, in these areas does do this. Facilities. Each of these concepts does address the physical conditions. Safety and security enhancements to all existing schools are enhanced. Improved ADA accessibility. And each plan that you're about to see, option that you're about to see, would indeed reduce the number of facilities. The concepts presented, the attendance boundaries are a shift from current boundaries. The concepts presented would be a reduction in transitions that you heard Ms. Testa speak about, but there would be a reduction in transitions during their child's K-8 experience. And the concepts, each of them, imply some type of grade level configuration, reconfiguration. And the first concept is maintain.
Hi, everyone. Dave set us up nicely. Stacy and I are going to go through a lot of detail here, so you have to bear with us. I'm a parent, I'm not a public speaker. And it is a lot of information. We are going to kind of go through the bullet points. We have some visuals. Dave set it up. I don't need to keep repeating it. I just want to remind you again. This is conceptual in nature. So we have some opportunities here to think about what might be possible. We're going to explore them, and at the end, after we go through all the details, Craig will come up and do a really nice summary to wrap it all up. So we'll get started. Our first concept is maintain. As you see, this would include 4 schools and reduce transitions to 1 transition for our students that remain in Winnetka from kindergarten through 8th grade. 3 kindergarten through 4th grade elementary schools, and you'll see some numbers of enrollment here. Due to the shifting of attendance boundaries, we would be able to balance the enrollment issue and solve for that. Washburn would become a school of 5th through 8th grade, and Skokie would be decommissioned. And of course, there would be much more discussion and planning to determine how Skokie would be used in the future. And one thing to note about the maintain plan is those of you that are familiar with the history of Winnetka, this is very similar to what we did in the 1980s to handle the enrollment decline. So probably not a surprise to those of you that have been around for a while or grew up around here. And Stacy's just going to kind of go through how this plan would address the 3 areas that Dave and many others have spoken to tonight.
Okay, as we look at the 3 lenses, let me highlight the maintain concept. Remember, I'm emphasizing the differences here. They've already emphasized how they all will be similar in how they move forward. But in terms of facilities, there would be a decommissioning of Skokie School. The space would be rented or repurposed, and that would be part of future discussion. Cafeterias and or kitchens would be added to the elementary schools. In terms of enrollment, neighborhood elementary schools are maintained. And provision for teaching and learning, there would be no future ready. Current class size guidelines cannot be guaranteed at the elementary schools. Grade level configuration results in 1 transition. Thermal comfort will be addressed by upgrading existing infrastructure that would include air conditioning in all of the buildings. And kinetic wellness spaces at Crow Island and Washburn would be expanded.
All right, so now everyone's wondering what would this actually look like. So we have some visuals. Again, concept level, right? So we're going to first look at Washburn. Washburn, again, is going to be welcoming 2 additional grade levels. So we would have to account for that through some additional kinetic wellness space and cafeteria space to accommodate the additional students that would be in the building. Because this concept addresses enrollment balancing only, this is not including any future ready design space, learning spaces. And another thing to note with this concept is that because of welcoming 2 additional grade levels, teachers would be sharing spaces. So we wouldn't have designated classrooms like maybe some are accustomed to who have students currently at Washburn. There would be some requirement to share spaces to accommodate for the additional students in the building. Skokie's not shown on this visual, but just as a note, we mentioned earlier, Skokie would be decommissioned and there would be a plan at the district level for how to use that space moving forward. If you want to move to Crow Island. So here at Crow Island, you'll see, and many of you that are from the Crow Island community or are longtime community members know that Crow Island is a historic landmark. So when we look at concept level ideas, we're not going to indicate, where an addition space would go. That would be something that would be further along in the actual design process. This gives you an idea of how much space would need to be added, that we would have a kinetic wellness addition and a cafeteria addition. And again, that would include not just a lunchroom, but a cafeteria with a kitchen space. The temporary classroom could be decommissioned with a return to more shared space. So again, like I mentioned in the Washburn option, here again at Crow Island, teachers would need to share some spaces. Not every teacher or specialist would have a designated space for their own, I should say. And then if we move to Greeley, there would be a kitchen renovation in the lower level. Greeley already has a lunchroom, for those of you that don't know that, but does not have a kitchen. And then moving to Hubbard Woods, cafeteria and kitchen would be added. All right, so moving along the continuum, the next option concept we would present is the enhanced concept. Again, in this concept, we would be 4 schools in the district and reducing transition from 2 to 1. The 3 elementary schools would serve kindergarten through 3rd grade. And you'll notice the enrollment projections are slightly lower. This would be due to shifting boundaries and the movement of the 4th graders up to a new Washburn, which would become 4th through 8th grade with additions and renovations. At the elementary school level, because of the lower enrollment across all 3 schools, this would allow for flexibility of the learning spaces in a different way than the maintain concept. Then you're wondering, what would we do with Skokie? Skokie would be reduced to an auditorium only, preserved as a community facility, and you heard Tricia speak to this earlier, that we see our public schools as facilities for the whole community. The community takes advantage of it in a variety of different ways. So we felt that it would make sense in this concept to introduce the idea of maintaining the Skokie auditorium for that purpose.
Okay, so once again, let's look at the enhanced concept through the 3 lenses. When we look at facilities, we would take down the north and south wings of the Skokie School. The auditorium and community space would be preserved for community use. Cafeterias and or kitchens would be added to the elementary schools. Additions and renovations would be done to Washburn. And the traffic flow would be improved with additional drop-off points. In terms of enrollment, neighborhood elementary schools are maintained. And for the vision for teaching and learning, Future Ready would be given to the Washburn facility for our 4th through 8th graders. Current class size guidelines can be upheld. Grade level reconfiguration results in 1 transition. Thermal comfort can be addressed by upgrading existing infrastructures at all the buildings. AC will be included. And kinetic wellness spaces at Crow Island and Washburn would be expanded.
All right, this is where it's going to get tricky for me. So let's just look at a slide of the site. So what are you looking at? If you see the dotted lines as a starting point, that is the current existing footprint of our 2 buildings at this site now as it exists today. So what's changing? Let's start with Washburn. To the left, you'll see the 2 academic clusters in blue. So those are the current north and south wings that exist now, would be taken down and reconstructed to create academic clusters of developmentally appropriate space to account for the additional students of 4th through 8th grade. Kinetic wellness and cafeteria space would be expanded to serve grades 4 through 8. Washburn's courtyards would be renovated and 2 new outdoor spaces added to provide indoor-outdoor experiential learning opportunities. And as you can see, there are 2 pickup and drop-off points that have been added to deal with additional traffic flow. 2 developmentally appropriate playgrounds have been included. And what am I missing? Oh, Skokie. So let's move to Skokie. The Skokie auditorium would be preserved, so you can see the center of the building. What is the blue, you're wondering? We would renovate to add the appropriate, spaces around the auditorium, the lobby, to continue to preserve that as a community facility. Now, we have a video that's going to just help you visualize this a bit. So let's take a look together. So that was the initial visual concept of the new Washburn for grades 4 through 8. So now what's happening at the elementary school level in the enhanced plan concept. Kinetic wellness space, cafeteria, and future-ready multi-purpose space would be added to Crow Island. So important to note, enhance, we're talking about adding future-ready spaces. So that's a difference from the maintain plan, as we mentioned. Again, Crow Island is an historic landmark, so we can't show you exactly where those additions that would come later in the planning process. Greeley kitchen renovation, and Hubbard Woods cafeteria and kitchen. All right. So let's talk about transform. So this is the boldest concept that we're presenting tonight. We're talking about transforming our facilities. 2 schools, 1 transition, all the students would be together. 1 kindergarten through 1st grade center at Crow Island, and a new 2nd grade through 8th grade center constructed at the Skokie site. We would preserve the investment made in the Washburn gyms. Those could be used for district purposes and also, again, as a community facility, as we've heard, that's definitely a need in Winnetka. And both Greeley and Hubbard Woods would be decommissioned for rent or repurposing. As we move further along in the plan, the district would make decisions about how best to use those spaces. This plan, just to start before Stacy speaks, just want a couple of notes that this plan, this concept would maximize the access to future-ready learning spaces and address possible enrollment fluctuation over time. And again, we recognize it would be a reconfiguration of the district.
So let's look at the final concept here through the 3 lenses. For facilities, it would improve safety and security. With a new 2-8 configuration, it would be infused through the design rather than be an add-on. University accessibility would be given to the new 2 through 8 building, once again infused through the design rather than add-on. The traffic flow would be diverted from the main road with pickup and a drop-off circle. In terms of enrollment, no neighborhood elementary schools, but there would be 1 Winnetka school community. For the vision for teaching and learning, all students would attend Crow Island for K1 and the future-ready new 2 through 8 at the Skokie site. Current class size guidelines are upheld. Grade level configuration results in 1 transition. Thermal comfort can be addressed in an optimal way in 2 through 8 from a cost-effective savings, but air conditioning would be included at both the 2 through 8 site and Crow Island. And there would be expanded kinetic wellness space and multi-purpose at the Crow Island site.
So this is a bold concept, and now everyone's like, what would this look like, right? So, again, a slide of our current Skokie Washburn site. Again, dotted lines are the existing footprints of our buildings now as they stand. We can start on the Skokie side. This is where the new construction would take place. Most of Skokie would be demolished, saving the auditorium and a few key spaces at the center of the building. And then we would be adding. So if you can visualize Skokie as it exists now, the building would not be any wider, but adding off the back and then rising the wings to a higher level, about the same level as the height of the auditorium as it currently stands. I think that was helpful for me to try to understand the actual size of that building to accommodate grades 2 through 8. And again, this concept, we're going to show you a video also, just to show you an idea of what it might look like or what it could look like. And we, as a whole core team, felt that it was important to keep the construction consistent with the character that Skokie currently has, and then I think that's a value in our community also. The Washburn side, you'll see that's where the current gyms are. So the rest of the building where the dotted lines are, you'll see that building would be demolished. And the track is actually like a pickup and drop-off site that could be closed during the day for student use. You'll see the play areas, all of which, all new construction, new play areas, as I mentioned earlier, developmentally appropriate, child-centered. You want to move to the video now? So just a final note, as you watch the video, we noticed a few things. Potentially rooftop courtyards, outdoor, indoor STEM learning experiences. I think the takeaway for me on a transform option is that all of the design is creating purposeful learning spaces. So we would be, again, maximizing the access to future-ready learning spaces for all the students, grades 2nd through 8th grade. As we move to Crow Island, again, this is gonna look a bit similar, but just important to note that as we move along the continuum, we're talking about additional future-ready learning spaces at Crow Island for those kindergarten through 1st graders. And of course, the cafeteria and the kinetic wellness spaces for those students. In terms of Greeley and Hubbard Woods, just another important note, as I mentioned before, we're talking about decommissioning any of our buildings. The district would make a thoughtful determination about how best to use those spaces. Did I miss anything? No. All right, Craig's gonna help summarize all of this.
Thanks, Kirby. Well, that last concept definitely gathered the most chatter out there. I could hear everyone talking. So it's good, it's good. I'm excited to be here. Excited to kind of try to take you through the summary of what the differences are. It's an exciting time for our community. We have the opportunity here to build off of a legacy of Carlton Washburn, a legacy of our own community who had the foresight to build the school we're sitting in right now. So hopefully, from summarizing the 3 options or concepts that we just laid out, the community could come to some type of next logical step. So before we get into going through the points of difference between each of them, it's good to always go back to why we're here. And we're here is to try to figure out what's the best way to invest for our community. I want to bring back some numbers that were discussed earlier in the night just to kind of get a frame on what that baseline is that we're looking at over the next several years or next few years on just upgrading or maintaining the facilities that we have today. It's already looking at a $22.4 million. And if we wanted to take the next step to include air conditioning, it's $33.7 to $38.2 million. So we look at baseline as really not part of a master plan, and that's what we've been tasked with here, is to come up with a master plan for the community, because we really don't want to just be reactive. We want to be proactive. So getting right into the summary here, let's first talk about the structures, because that's probably what a lot of people are concerned about in this room right now, is where will your kids be going to school? So the big differences between each of them are, in Maintain, we keep the 3 neighborhood K through 4 elementary schools, but 5 through 8 is at Washburn, and Skokie is decommissioned. In Enhance, we have 3 elementary schools, but they've transformed to, or they changed to K through 3, and 4 through 8 is at an Enhanced Washburn, where we introduce some of that future-ready capabilities in the classroom. And finally, at Transform, we're looking at 2 structures. All kindergarten through 1st grade goes to Crow Island, and 2nd through 8th go to a purposely built Skokie school that has future-ready in both facilities. So laying that out and laying all the priorities that the community and the staff laid out, responded to. When we look at the baseline and we look at, first of all, just the boundary issues that we're facing today. Yes, we are facing shifting attendance boundaries, even with our current structures. Yes, we can keep neighborhood schools with the structures, but we cannot maintain class guidelines for these structures, and we'll continue to have 2 transitions. There's no buildings that will be future ready in the baseline, and we will be able to affect enhanced safety and security and improved ADA access and even thermal comfort if we wanted to approach that. However, none of it is infused in the design, so there are limitations to what we can do there as well. This is by far going to be the lowest first-year cost that you're going to see. However, the cost for the next 2 to 30 years, which we look at 2 to 30 years out, because that is the typical lifespan of the operations that are involved in the building, such as the boilers, the pipes, the roofs. So that's typically the lifespan of the components in the building. By making these changes or affecting them in baseline, we will have the highest cost over that next 30 years. And when we do put those in place, the efficiency on them are the lowest, so it will actually cost us more each year to run them. We lay out the 3 concepts that we presented on the continuum. With Maintain, Enhance, and Transform, once again, we will need to shift boundaries. We will be able to keep neighborhood schools at Maintain and Enhance, but as you saw in Transform, it will move from neighborhood schools to a town school, basically. On the maintaining the class size, which I hope we did a good job of indicating the importance there, with Maintain, we cannot guarantee that class size in each school will be optimal. However, at Enhance and Transform for the foreseeable future, we could. We'd also seen a change in transitions at each of these options. So we'd moved to basically 1 transition between all of them with a different point in each option. Future Ready, which was indicated by the community by the survey as the number 1 priority going forward. As I said already at baseline, it has none of it factored into it. Maintain does not either. At Enhance, we'll start implementing that at the revised Washburn School. And in Transform, it would be in both facilities. And once again, it will be planned into the buildings of those, so obviously we can present greater opportunity there for Future Ready. And then when it comes to the structure of each facility, when we look at enhanced safety and security, thermal comfort, and improved ADA access, basically it's along a spectrum. And that comes straight from the fact that it would be infused in the design of the building. So if you have a brand new building, you can take all those concepts into the engineering and into the design of it, and it'll be at optimal level. If we're retrofitting buildings, it's oftentimes, as you probably can see in some of the buildings you walk through now, when it's an afterthought, it can't be as well designed into it. And then finally, probably what everyone's really waiting for is what is the cost structure on this? So we try to look at it as an order of magnitude, and we already tried to give you kind of what the So when we look at along the spectrum from maintain to transform, the higher cost is going to be up front, and then over the lifespan of the building, you'll see a lower cost of that. Along with that too, when I talk about, when you see the number on the far right, the OM&E, which is operations, maintenance, and energy, on a newly constructed building, you're going to have more savings over time than when you have to retrofit some of these systems into our older structures. And finally, I'll bring REACH up one more time. I know we discussed it before, and this is basically the every option we looked at where if money was not an option, or not a concern at all. But we do have a financial responsibility to the community. So although there was some options that probably would tick off 3 checks across everything, and basically if we can make everybody happy in this room and everybody happy in the community and money was no limit, that would be the option. But that's not what we have in front of us. And then finally, what's the timeline of these changes look like? And keep in mind, these are conceptual, so there probably will be, changes going forward. But this is basically the timeline we're looking at from approval from the community, from the town, and going forward. So at a maintain, we're looking at anywhere from 2 to 6 years. Enhance, 5 years out, and transform 3 years out.
All right, it's very quiet, which a lot to think about for sure. I do want to mention before I talk about next steps, just my appreciation for the core team and the courage it takes to think big. These, if you haven't heard it probably 1,000 times, I'm going to say it one more time. These are concepts. We're trying to present those to you as a community and get feedback from you as what your initial thoughts are and help provide direction going into the future as well as the board. So we are sharing these concepts tonight. The board is going to have the opportunity tonight to engage in Q&A. There will be an opportunity for public comment. Just as a reminder, Kristen said we don't engage in public comment at board meetings, but we do have 2 meetings, one scheduled for this Friday at 9:30 a.m. That'll be at Skokie School, and then one next Thursday night, the 22nd at 7. We will have core team members there and have an opportunity for more open Q&A. There also will be a community survey launched within the next 24 hours. It'll be available on our website. We do want you to take that survey, give us some feedback. We also have a dedicated email address that allows you to share new concepts or ideas or iterations. Those will all be reviewed by the core team, and so please know that we don't necessarily respond to every question in that, but we also gather frequently asked questions to make sure we keep our community informed. So we will continue to engage and continue to learn and continue to refine. So we'll be engaging, as we said, on these initial concepts through spring break, and then start to meet again as a core team and refine some of these concepts for the board meeting in April. And then from there, it's our goal to have some greater direction as far as where we start to add traction and detail to the direction we'd like to head. So there's quite a bit of communication ahead of us and engagement. By June, the goal is to have a direction and an educational master facility plan that we can move forward on and plan for, but obviously there's a lot that needs to happen between March and June, to say the very least. So again, I'm going to ask the board to come back up to their seats, and some of our core team members will now go and take the front seats. Earlier, there are handouts that are available outside on the tables that give a summary of the concepts.
It's a mouthful. It was a lot of information. Over a long period of time, clearly a lot of work has been done and a lot of thought has been put into it. And I guess I open the table up for questions, comments, thoughts. Anyone?
Quickly, so Kelly, you mentioned you guys did research onto transitions. Obviously, the fewer the better. I'm guessing from what I've seen, the earlier the age, the better. Is that where you guys, I mean, what's the best time, if there is a best time to transition kids?
Sure. So there wasn't necessarily a best time, but what the research did show is that younger students, so possibly K through 3, tend to be a little bit more resilient when it comes to change. And there are definitely districts in the area that have configured themselves to be more of a primary, intermediate, and then middle school configuration.
Cool. Crow Island, does the maintain option move any of the stuff that's currently in the basement upstairs? Get the resource center, the computer center, does it give any enhancement to any of that?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Can you give us some order of magnitude for the cost? So we've got the dollar signs. There's 4 on the transform. There's 3. And there's, can you?
Question everybody wants.
Yeah, right. I'm trying to understand particularly the difference magnitude-wise between enhance and transform. You gave us some numbers for maintain. I'm not trying to force you into a corner here, but it would be helpful. Are we talking 200 million? I mean, what are we talking about here realistically from a dollars perspective?
As was shared earlier in the presentation, all 3 options, maintain, enhance, and transform, are within the current debt limit of the district. In our experience, planning educational master facility plans, it's best to work through the concepts and then provide more refined dollars as we get closer to an answer, rather than provide individual dollars at this point in the process. So what you saw in the diagram was an inverse relationship of first-time costs to life cycle costs, or the cost over time. We do know that the initial cost is a small percentage of the operational costs that would occur over any lifespan of a building. You noted the 30-year window that was estimated as an order of magnitude. As you know, you have buildings that well exceed a 30-year life cycle, so we would see that repeat over time. So that savings measured in the life cycle cost would be a repetitive savings versus the initial cost, the initial capital outlay to construct whatever choice was made would be just a small percentage of that. So a long answer to your short question with, we're not quite there yet.
Okay, I'm going to push a little bit on that though. So our debt limit is what, 90?
So it's, I'll let Brad talk about, it's a calculation, it's a formula, EAV.
It's a calculation of our equalized assessed value, which is about 1.4 billion, just over in 2016. So theoretically, if you take 6.9% of that, it's 99 million. We still have about $16 million in debt outstanding that we're paying off over the next 4 years. So it would be reduced by that amount. And then as debt falls off, our debt ceiling goes up.
The short answer is the debt limit, because it's the 6.99 factor of EAV is just at 99 million. So anything in here is within that.
Okay, then can I just get an understanding of how close? You don't even have to give me a dollar, but how big is the differential between enhance and transform? 25% more? 30% more? Can you get any of that, or are you not comfortable sharing that?
It's right. It's conceptual. It's early, so this is where we could run a risk of over-promising and under-delivering, quite frankly, or sending some mixed messages. It's just within that you can see transform has $4 signs and in the initial and enhance has 3, so it's 1/4 less, and just it gives. I know that's a frustrating part, but it is. We are at the concept phase.
Prior to board approval, we obviously flesh out these costs and share
Before we would even commit to a direction, yeah.
Okay, but it's not 2x more, because then we would see $2 signs versus $4.
Not twice as much between any of the 3 concepts.
I'm not trying to be flippant. I get it. This is impossible to figure out right now. I really do. I have nothing but admiration for all of you guys and the work you put into this. So I don't mean to sound like I do get it. I'm just trying to, as much as I can, get a handle on that piece of it.
Can I ask a different question? First, I want to say thank you to everybody. thinking outside the box, thinking about new things is hard, and I appreciate you doing that. And this community likes to think things over. So I really appreciate you doing it, and I hope everybody understands we're all thinking things over for the next while here. How come it looked to me like future ready wasn't something that could be put into existing buildings the way you defined it? And so all the options with, I think if I saw right, the existing buildings, unless you basically did new renovation, didn't include future ready. Why is that?
Two answers. So on the continuum from maintain to enhance to transform, we wanted to provide distinct and clear choices within each. It is not to say that future ready is not possible inside of your existing facilities. That is not a conclusion that the core team has drawn. That doesn't mean that future ready is the same size as your existing facilities. As was mentioned during the presentation by several of the teachers, how the differentiation within the classroom and even out of the classroom currently happening in the hallways begs a facility need an increase in diversifying the spatial typologies available. So it is not to say that future ready is not possible in your existing facilities. It is just not on the continuum presented this evening. Now you could say an enhanced, for example, where the fourth graders move up to Washburn and the additional capacity essentially inside of the existing elementary schools affords you the opportunity to create those renovations more readily inside of the existing four walls, proverbial four walls. So by moving the grade level out and enhance and up affords you that. Now there are another whole host of issues with your existing sites and the ability to expand them from an impervious area and a floor area ratio and all sorts of technical things that have to be considered. And that is one of the levers of enhance that still can be flipped, if you will, to say that we would like future ready to occur inside of these proverbial four walls.
Sorry, can I ask that we just, for reference sake, just put the summary grid up on the screen? That would help us.
Hang on, thank you.
But on your same question, there wasn't, at least in the maintain and enhance, I didn't see a lot planned yet into the actual classrooms. There was some additional space that were future ready space, but as far as changing the setup of the classrooms to have the windows and the small groups and that kind of thing that I think somebody mentioned, that's not part of what you've, at this point, planned into the enhanced model, right?
Correct, with the exception of the 4A at Washburn.
Okay.
You're talking about the existing.
We probably should have said that when we were talking about the new Washburn.
Okay.
That there would be some of those
in the new
spaces. So when we talk about just adding future ready, it wasn't just within those new academic clusters.
So
there would be those spaces.
There would even in
those
the
would be
other
new.
existing parts.
Most of the center core of Washburn that you saw in white and enhance is comprised of the space we're sitting in now.
Okay.
The spaces that were added 10 or so years ago in the front of the building with orchestra, band, music, those kinds of things, as well as the gymnasium. So that center core of the building has been preserved, and the goal of enhance was to create that future-ready transformation for the learning environments themselves. So if you noted in the diagram, the existing footprint was smaller than the planned addition. So that was to accommodate not only the grade level transitions, but as well as the future-ready needs.
Right, in fairness to the core team too, they said, well, we could phase in future ready at the elementary levels and enhance, for instance, but we tried to have a clear definition of these concepts just to give a reference point. But yes, absolutely, you can phase it in and the dollar signs will go up.
Just one other note to add, because this sort of piggybacks on the earlier question you had to Kelly about transitions. I think that one thing that we talked about and thought a lot about was, at what point does it make sense for children to transition from one building to another. But in that enhanced model, one advantage is that because there will be so many more future-ready learning spaces in the new Washburn, for fourth graders to have that opportunity maximizes those spaces in that plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Also, if you're phasing in, we have limited time in a school year. We have the summers. The time frame might make it more expensive just because we're so limited in the time frame. So phasing in does become a more costly option in that regard.
I have a few questions about the maintain piece. First of all, I also echo Nat's sentiments. Thank you for all your time and effort. And I would thank you for thinking inside the box as well as thinking outside the box and taking a look at everything from baseline out to reach. So I appreciate the scope of the thinking. So on maintain, my first question is that the range of completion was the widest of any of the options from 2 to 6 years. Could be the shortest, could be the longest. If you could give me a little more texture around why that is. And secondly, then, what the disruption looks like right, under maintain in terms of schools and what happens in those transitions, right? Do we move kids around? Does all the disruption happen in the summer? Help me understand that. Because we're disrupted for 6 years. That's an interesting thing to think about. And one more thing related to the disruption piece and the length of the ring. Does it add to cost, right? If we stretch that thing out, that maintain out for 6 years, how much does that change the initial cost estimates of what we're looking at?
Okay, so your first question first. So to the durations and estimates that were shared earlier this evening. So with respect to maintain, the choice is really how fast you want to go. You have the most latitude in maintain because most of that work can occur without disruption to education or within a summer window. So you could say that we're going to do all the facilities at once, hence the 2-year window for design, planning, review, construction. Or you could say that we're going to pace it out at more of a 1 school per year approach. So the additional year, because you have 5 facilities, that's 5 years. The additional year is design, planning, and review. And then once you get going in the cycle, you can design while the next one is being constructed and so on and so forth. So you get the window from 2 to 6 that way. Your second question was cost over time. So historically speaking, construction cost escalation ranges from low 3% to high 4% annually. Labor costs, material costs, so on and so forth. So the longer you phase out any of these projects, the more money, the more initial first-time cost, that column that's up on screen, cost to build year 1, would fluctuate. So if you were to say, I want to do maintain over the 6-year window, you're going to incur that 3% to 4% escalation with every project.
So I'll follow up on the disruption question for a second. So let's go down to transform, right, where you're knocking down Skokie School and rebuilding around it. What does the disruption look like that then for those kids who are in those, who wouldn't be in those grades in the current Skokie configuration?
So enhance is really the answer to that question. For the same reasons that we were allowed to move 5 and 6 up to Washburn, in that model, in that case, without future ready. Am I saying that right? And maintain. That's maintain, not enhance. All right, thank you. So those 5 through 8th graders would occupy the Washburn facility while the Skokie facility was being constructed. And then once the Skokie facility was constructed, you could either choose to move all grade levels in at once, or you could phase the grade level move in over time.
So what's is 3 years the shortest period then, or is that 3 is the shortest?
3 is the shortest period.
Can I ask you a question? Did you look at the research about size of school for this age kid? Because I look at, when you're talking about neighborhood comparables, Sunset Ridge, Sears, and Avoca are all around 500 kids. And 2 of the options, I believe, are over 950 kids. And that's, I would think, different. So is there research, not just about transitions, but about size of school?
I'll step in on this one. So one of the reasons why we were interested in visiting other school sites, we visited in Virginia, California, and Minnesota, was to get a sense for how some of these newer builds or renovations or larger school sites were able to configure the building to accommodate different developmental needs. We saw everything from different wings. So you saw in one of the models, you saw different academic clusters at Washburn in the north and south wings. You can do everything from entry to the cluster of where the classrooms are located. But there's also a lot of, even within our township, ways that you can build community and culture around having a school that has multiple grade levels within it. That would certainly have to be a part of our process and planning once we committed to one of these concepts. in thinking through how do you accommodate for a building that has second graders and eighth graders. How do you make one school community out of that, as well as smaller communities within second, third, fourth versus fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth.
Having worked at a middle school with 1,200 kids, something such as, and I know we're not this level of planning, such as the teaming concept that we have, which creates that smaller school within the school, which is what Kelly's referring to, that other sense of community. So to still have those teams and maybe even continue to loop provides that smaller sense for those kids. So the building itself is larger, but they're associated with that team of students and that team of teachers.
As I think about this, and we're looking at mere dollar signs at this point as opposed to numbers, to get your head around what this means when you're making a trade-off between upfront costs versus overtime operating and maintenance expense costs, right? So when might we get to a point where we can kind of do a corporate finance exercise 101 on net present value so that we can really compare apples to apples and say fixed costs higher in the new enhance or transform, I guess, but much lower operating expenses versus the alternative? I mean, when can we reasonably expect to kind of get a sense of that? Not until you kind of figure out the concept. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what you have to do later.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we needed direction
Yeah.
to where we want to head, so we can form more detail around that to get a ability to make a harder estimate on that, so that we have a better idea what that might look like. So we do need to get further down than just the concept road to start to move towards a specific direction that we're actually going to put some meat around and some more details around.
So from a timeline perspective, I think we're looking at probably 4 to 6 weeks before we'll have enough information from the community and other stakeholders to say, we're going to refine 3 to 2, or we're going to explore this further. We've already begun, as a part of our process, we've already begun thermal analysis of all the buildings. We already have an idea of what we can do to provide you with that detailed information, and it is in process. What we're missing is the refinement that will occur such that we can put a finer point on those numbers. One of my hesitations to providing you that detail tonight is I know from going through these processes in the past that things will continue to evolve, and those numbers will continue to evolve. And so I want to be able to provide you with as much information that is meaningful to you so you can continue the process and make decisions. I think that's important and shouldn't be understated. But I also want to spend the next roughly 4 to 6 weeks with the core team and the community really understanding what that means before we go back and crunch more numbers.
Add to that, we have engaged Amoresco through phase 4 as well, so once we start putting these concepts and fleshing them out a little bit more, they will be doing the cost estimation as well, on not necessarily on the life cycle piece of the operations, maintenance, and energy, but more about the concepts that we're discussing.
I should mention one more thing, that there's a reconciliation to be done with the $22.4 million that was identified for the needed repairs in your facilities with any amount of change that would occur along the continuum, such that we're not double dipping on costs. We're not saying that it costs X number of dollars to renovate, but forgetting the fact that we're already spending 22.4 or vice versa. So we need to create that reconciliation and be more targeted about how the cost is balanced across the district.
This is going to get me in trouble, so I'm going to, please, no one hold me to this. My question is, did you look at the concept of $4 signs equivalent of more teachers instead of more buildings, and seeing if that moved the needle for teaching? I know that wasn't the task we gave you, so that's why I'm asking, is that would be way more outside the box. But we, in the end, have staff whose job it is to teach our kids how to really learn. And the buildings, in my mind, are only a tool towards achieving the goal. And if the buildings make the teacher better, great. I think we heard Bird and we heard Steve and some others say that. Did anybody, was anywhere in this discussion the concept of what the difference would be? Or we don't know the dollars well enough to know what that would be per year? Is that,
So the short answer is no, that wasn't right in the discussion point of the core team. But a couple things is one is we are in enrollment decline, and so the board, as was referenced earlier, has a financial philosophy and obligation to try to align staffing with enrollment. At the same time, this board and previous boards last few years have also been open to program enhancements that may not align with enrollment, but help advance some programming or student experiences or some specialty areas. One just last month, we talked about the Resource Center and technology. So I would say I'm fair to say there's some assumption that the board has been open to looking at resources and educators as a way to help students and, kind of looking at the dollar benefit to that investment back to the kids. As far as the environment goes itself, I think what we've also tried to share today and show you through stories and pictures is the idea that we're always looking for the best possible resources to support our teaching and learning. Whether it be a textbook, whether it be an app, whether it be just a great activity as Kim described to really engage students. There's a lot of different ways to engage students, and what we're hearing and working with our staff is the environment and the space is also a tool. And so how do we make use of our space? That was actually one of DLR's first comments to us is your staff does a really good job with the space they have, trying to make it as conducive as possible to learning and be flexible. But kind of opening this envelope for our staff, we've also heard about the limitations that the space provides. So it is a resource. So, we certainly haven't equated the dollar amounts to teaching staff, but I would also say I think there's an assumption that the board is open to the idea that there is teaching needs, and we can verify that with evidence and how it helps student outcomes, that the board's been pretty supportive of honoring that. So it's not exclusionary. Yeah.
Yeah, and this might get me in trouble. As a parent touring all 5 schools in one day, well, 2 things. First, I would say I'm proud to be a resident of Winnetka and the tradition of the Winnetka public schools, and I think that historically the board has made great decisions on investments in teachers, and you see it. I mean, when you go to all 5 schools in one day, you see the investment that we have made over time in our teachers and staff across every area, support staff, custodial, everything. And what struck me going to all 5 schools in one day was how hard our teachers work to make things, to make it the best possible experience for their students. And sometimes not so great conditions. And even at Greeley, I was struck with a science facilitator who was sharing an office space with another professional, specialists doing really innovative things in our schools with our kids every day. And they're making it work. They are. But then I visited schools all over the area and saw and thought, what would be possible for our teachers if they had more space? And to think about a further investment in teachers, of course, as a parent, I would support that for sure. As a core team member and the work that we've been doing, I would struggle to figure out how more teachers would even fit in some of the buildings that we have now. I don't know how practically that would work. I don't know how many more specialists or teachers you could fit in a small office space, I think that would be a challenge.
fair enough. My goal is not to add a vast number of teachers to the system. My goal is to figure out how to get the best results for the taxpayer's dollar.
I just want to say one more thing too, because I agree with what Kirby said from touring all the schools and that. We didn't look at adding more teachers, but I can't think of the studying that we did or any of the numbers we saw that adding more bodies will make that top right OEM 2 to 30 years go down any. That is a structural issue more than a personnel issue, and that's not I don't think if we had more teachers if we could affect that.
In any of your research, did you find that pre versus post, like once a school got renovated or a new school got built in the district, did outcomes change at all along those lines of effectiveness for student student scores, or however you want to measure outcomes?
We talked about this as a staff at Skokie this afternoon when I shared this information with the staff. One of the buildings that I visited in Minneapolis was a total new build, a 5-8 building, and they had a 5-6 wing and a 7-8 wing with shared space in between. And I spoke with the principal about what the biggest challenges have been since the beginning of the process, so before the building was built, and then through the process of having this newly constructed space. And he shared with me that it really doesn't matter if you have these beautifully constructed spaces, if you don't have teachers that are willing to utilize them for what they're capable for. That really struck me because there's one thing I know about our staff, and that is exactly what Kirby and Craig just shared, that they will make the most of their space, whether it's from 1920 or 1965. They'll make it work. What I think we're seeing here is that we have the flip of what Jordan Middle School had. We have the stellar staff and the not so stellar physical space, and they have the reverse. So anyone in leadership will tell you that if you've got the people, you can make it happen. If you've only got the space, it's a little harder.
Sorry, I have another question. On the maintain piece and the cost, $3 signs there for your cost to build. For any of us who have lived in or attempted to renovate or work in, live in an older home at least, every time you crack open something, it seems like there's more to it than that. So is that maintained estimate, again, we're in Bitcoin or whatever those things are. Is that the most realistic, or should we be thinking about a range, frankly, for that maintained piece because of the unknown of working with older facilities over time?
Or even the enhanced, because the enhanced is going to be cracking down a lot of walls. So.
Okay, sure enough, right?
I think that that's a very fair point, and it would have probably been more confusing to the presentation to have a dollar range in dollars to dollars. But your point is very well taken in that anytime you renovate an existing facility, particularly one of vintage, as you may have experienced in your own personal lives, there are unforeseen conditions. There are things that you just can't see inside of that wall or beyond it to know what's there. And so proper planning would allow us to establish contingencies based on real-world experience to say that this is approximately those kinds of potential overruns that you might have now. That could range from anything from soils or floodplains or anything and everything in between. And so as we move forward into the process, and I know that the dollar symbol signs are a lot of questions tonight, that's perfectly understandable, we'll be able to begin to refine those further. And so I ask for the collective patience of the board and the community as we work through this process to really understand what those are, and as we get closer, we'll get closer on the dollars. But your point is very well taken.
So, a related question. What's the degree of difficulty in even getting some of the proposed additions or changes to Crow Island through? Right? I know that it is a challenging situation often. What's the realistic assessment of it?
Well, we're stuck in that right now. We're working on getting some accessibility issues taken care of, and it's stuck at the state due to some the stewardship issue and maintaining the landmark status. So it does slow down the process. We're hopeful that we'll get an answer in the near future so we can get that work done this summer. But it does put us in a holding pattern. And as far as the future goes, we have sat down with the zoning board for Winnetka. They are aware of the plan, and we're in discussions with that. We asked about permeable space. We asked about zoning in general, and we will involve them in this process up front just to make sure we're within the bounds of their guidelines. We do have to work with them. It didn't used to be that way, but some districts went out of bounds, and now you're required, although we always have here in Winnetka, worked with the township in order to make sure we're living within the guidelines that they've set.
So could Crow Island's historical status essentially hamstring the timeline for a lot of this?
Well, it takes a longer, it's a longer process at Crow Island because of the additional steps.
Right, and I'm just asking if that timeline was sort of inclusive of the potential challenges that go along with modifying a historical building?
We did make an educated guess to that when we were putting the timelines together. However, the state of Illinois moves at the pace of the state of Illinois, and so we never can quite know until we're in the midst of it.
And we do have the board knows this, but the community knows this too. There is a stewardship committee at Groveland that does assist us in some of this work.
When you have in your visits the transform where you show Greeley and Hubbard Woods being decommissioned or repurposed or whatever that is, do you have a sense of what, and maybe this is an unfair question, but it seems to me if there's some value there, we could monetize it somehow if we were to go down that path. You could use some of those funds to defray the costs and whatever else you were doing with the existing buildings. Have we even thought about talking to the various governmental bodies as to what you could do with the land and what it's, you know, are we talking $2 signs or $4 signs, red ones or green ones? I don't know.
Well, I'll start, first of all, before we even would consider selling anything, we have to recognize, you know, where we are in time right now, and as you saw the enrollment history, where there are trucks, or kind of dips and valleys and peaks and valleys, I should say. You do want to think forward as if you ever need that additional space or school again in the future. And being such a landlocked community, it is something that is potentially difficult to sell. That doesn't mean you can't. That doesn't mean we can't get some financial benefit from it. But it is something that we'd want to study deeply to make sure we're not causing an issue for decades down the road. The other piece to your question was, have we talked to our other community partners? Yes, preliminarily, I don't think their boards have been involved at all, but just administratively, you know, some of our leaders and John Muno at the Park District was well aware of this plan that we were talking about and looking at their strategic plan at the Park District and potential benefits. Absolutely, even the library we talked to, and New Trier being so close to Greeley, just very preliminarily kind of shared some of these initial ideas and concepts just to allow them to start thinking about this. But I think, you know, there's obviously whole community benefit, even though we're an individual taxing agency in our community. We have one Winnetka community that the more we work together and find some shared benefit, it's good for all of us. So that's why, for instance, you saw a lot of the gyms remaining, a lot of community space and auditorium, because we do obviously recognize the value beyond just the teaching and learning piece of this, the community value piece of it. So that I would say that's an open process for us to pursue throughout this.
We haven't heard from this side of the table. You've lived and breathed it, I know.
Yeah, just again, and I think, thank you everybody for recognizing the core team have put in so many hours and have worked so hard on these presentations. I am marveling at how well they turned out tonight. But I think it's just so important to emphasize that these are concepts, and I know we've been reminded of that through each presentation, but this is Winnetka, and we can figure out what's important and what we need to do for our school learners, and we as a community can maybe not the reach where we're building a K-8, but we can certainly work together and come up with a plan that's fiscally responsible and provides the best environment for our teachers and our learners, and perhaps has some thermal comfort at the same time. But I don't know exactly what that looks like right now, and I think I can speak for this whole core team. I don't think any of us know exactly what's going to be coming down the pipeline and presented in June. I think that's something that we all have to figure out together and share our ideas, and then, you know, through DLR's tutelage, we can incorporate them and get, you know, figure out cost and actually practical aspects of each plan. So I don't have a question, I just want to say thank you.
I do want to emphasize one point there is the core team presented obviously a common presentation today, but that certainly doesn't mean there are common thoughts on all of this. And so we do have a representative committee, group, team that's coming together and really thinking this all through. And so it'll be, I actually said, which I think is true, this first meeting is actually going to be a lot easier than the next, because we're going to start shaping our direction And that's where we're gonna start having various perspectives come forward, and those may be happy with where we're heading, those that aren't. So I do commend them for doing exactly what we wanted them to do, is to share the diversity of opinion and thought, valuing our history, thinking about the future, and putting all those pieces together, first and foremost around our kids, secondly about the wider community. So,
Tricia, I'm just curious, have you had any conversations with anyone in real estate to talk about whether or not something like this would have an impact on home values? Quite frankly, I don't know, if we look at Northfield with the new Sunset Ridge, have they seen an uptick in anything there based on the schools? I'm just curious, I don't know.
yeah, so we have consulted, and we do have a realtor on our team as well, on the court team. But essentially, in most cases, in Northfield, Sunset Ridge, it's such a smaller boundary than ours, but they have seen an uptick in their movement of their property and things like that with the new, so.
I guess I would, I think about, I'll tell you where I'm at on this. I think I'm going to cut it up into three different things, which is let's say about the easy, what do we do? How do we execute on that, which I think Steve was asking that in terms of time and how to actually do it. And I'm not super concerned about that. I think that smarter people will figure that out. I think the money, I'm a taxpayer. I will not have kids in the system who will benefit from this. So I think about it from a taxpayer's perspective. But I also, since I do look at the financials of this district all the time, I am 100% sure that we are not efficient with our funds today. So I think whatever we come up with, the cost over time dollars, the net present value for sure, as Kristen mentioned, will be done in a way that is thoughtful and protective of the taxpayers. The one I actually do want to sort of get at is what are we actually building, and whether it's maintain, transform, or reach, right? In some hypothetical world where all those cost the same amount, let's just assume that was the case, I worry that we're trying to predict the future with perfect accuracy. I'm on the planning commission on behalf of this board. We struggle as a village with our plan because we tried to over-predict the future. This is how retail is going to be in 2018, and it ain't. I think my kids have had Steve Agaritas as a teacher, okay? My oldest, who's now graduating college, and Steve would teach an investment course. And if you'd asked him 20 years ago when he started teaching, he would go over to a chalkboard and he would write IBM 103 and 3/8 out of half in chalk. And I mean, maybe Steve could see the future, but if you'd asked him 20 years ago what would he need, he'd say better chalkboards. The world changed. I worry when you say future ready, how flexible is that reach and transform in terms of, I would really have great regret if we tried to over-predict the future of education, regardless of cost, in this plan.
A lot to unwrap there. I think that from a construction perspective, okay, facilities constructed of, pick one. Let's take Hubbard Woods, okay? The construction of Hubbard Woods is not designed to be flexible in the way that, say, a modern office building would be. And so, let me be more specific. So, Hubbard Woods is a masonry bearing structure with interior bearing walls that support the roof above. In the case of a modern office structure, for example, that same facility would be constructed of steel and would be partitioned inside of that steel with the design intent of having walls that could evolve over time. So one of the practices that we have adopted as an industry, as school designers, is to ensure that we have walls to last a specific duration. So In other words, a structural wall that's required to resist the lateral loading, and I may be going way too deep here, but that may resist the lateral loading of the facility, right? What makes it stand? It's a permanent wall. When you get down to the scale of time inside of that facility, you may have walls that are designed for 10 years' time. That wall you know is a place in which you can grow through in any given period. So let's take 10 years. Then you might have walls that are of the month. And so that wall might be of a configuration, as was mentioned earlier by Kim and Bird, how they would utilize team teaching across a wall. So that might be for a unit of time like a month. Then you could have walls of the minute. And you saw in some of the images of these operable partitions that can flex space into small, medium, and large. So we're designing facilities in a smarter way. We're putting in utilities in a smarter way. So we wouldn't put utilities in a 1-month wall. We would put utilities in a 50-year wall. And so you can have, with obviously some capital investment, but a small percentage of that capital investment, reconfiguration of space with wireless technology and other avenues to support the infusion that Kelly spoke about earlier. You can be smarter about how you put these buildings together, even from a water and sewer perspective. And so technology has really, construction technology, material technology, and then technology itself have really allowed us to be more fluid in how a building can change over time, in contrast to how buildings were previously constructed in any given time period in, say, Hubbard Woods. Does that help?
Certainly from an approach, I appreciate that. I think by June, when you guys will talk about approval, I'd love to see that flexibility, that ability to change and adapt, that we haven't overcommitted. That would be the one thing.
And I think the goal of the master plan would be to provide us a spatial construct. You know, a square footage such that you can continue to flex and flow over time and not box you into any one solution. That's the goal of the master plan. So a design process following a master plan would allow you to be more specific about this wall, that wall, this is how it looks, this, you know, so on and so forth. So I think this is really about the ideas and as planning as far into the future as we can conceive with reasonable accuracy.
Can I follow that thought for a second, though?
Sure.
On that thought, I also have learned to be humble. And my concern, I guess one of the things that interests me is the neighborhood elementary schools have served this town very well for a very many number of years. And maybe I'm biased because it's worked for me, and I accept that bias. But I would certainly be interested to see if there was a way in your example of a Hubbard Woods classroom, you know, the load-bearing wall issue, is there a way, under the question we talked about before about if you shifted a grade out and you created space, but can 3 classrooms become essentially 2 with some common space between them that be glassed in with some kind of, I mean, surely on a 1 or 2 examples, Greeley's probably built the same way throughout. Hubbard Woods is probably built the same way with that. I mean, on the maintain, enhance option somewhere in there, that's my question about future ready in existing schools. And it may not be as future ready the way we see the future today, but there's something in my mind to not being walking away from 100 years of learning of how it works for this town and still getting a lot of future ready. And I don't know where that trade is for me on dollars, but I'm a little jumpy about walking away and betting everything on 32 black.
But I think there's a third prong to that. It's not just, it's the cost effectiveness, right? You know, if you're putting future ready into a building that really, well, it comes down to the numbers in the end on that. I mean, is it more cost effective, or does it make any sense to do that to Hubbard Woods, or at some point you're saying it makes more sense to just do it all over? And I don't know, but I'm just, that's more of a triangle than a single line trade-off.
Right. And I think what I'm hearing, just to restate the obvious, is that we're obviously going to be very conservative, thoughtful, forward-thinking at the same time, which may not all go together, but we're not going to have completely open concepts and slides in every classroom to, you know, it's going to be very, we're gonna look at the educational value and what we know and feel that we're confident based on what we're hearing from our educators who we trust and very much value in this whole process, especially when we make these decisions that impact the classroom. So we wanna make decisions that are going to be able to advance what they are saying are already some limitations and not get, to Matt's point, I think too far down the road where we're, we're just kind of mimicking other environments that have gone future ready without seeing what the outcome or benefit is. So we need to weigh all the options, weigh the design, weigh the pieces to come up with something where we have confidence that the changes we're making are going to make a positive impact on our learning community and will do for years to come. So we hear you on that.
And just to answer the technical component of your question, it's absolutely possible to do what you characterized with a combination of 3 classrooms to 2 with some shared space in the middle. That's absolutely possible. Cost obviously will have to be considered, but yes.
Could we back way, way up? Maybe this is a question for Brad. We have these 100-year-old buildings, and we're looking at all these, we're looking at a large amount to maintain. Is there a lifespan on a building? At some point, are we going to have to, at what point, I won't be on the board then, but at what point is this community going to have to look at, building a new building, even if we keep doing this? I guess I'm just curious as to how far are we kicking the can down the road if we just maintain?
That's an interesting question because there are buildings on the East Coast that have been around for 300 or 400 years. There are buildings overseas that have been around for 500 years. The question is how useful are they? How energy efficient are they? Are they able to be adapted? 100 years is a long lifespan for a building, and I imagine when they built them, they didn't see them maybe even lasting as long as they have. I don't know if you have more to add.
I think from a structural perspective, I don't really have any concerns. I think that the facilities and walking them and really understanding what they are, I think they have the potential to be a long-lasting solution for the community. But I echo Brad's comment, and I don't know about the financial investment over time. We do know that there is an increase in cost over time to maintaining older facilities that can be quantified. But as to the value of all of this, that's for someone else to decide, right? What is the intrinsic value of these spaces, the neighborhood schools, those kinds of things? That's the essential question of the master plan. We can answer the technicalities for you, but the value proposition is yours.
When you looked at the various configurations, did you as a team consider K-5 buildings?
Yes, it's a great question. There are some existing impediments to the amount of space you can add onto your existing facilities without additional cost and stress added. So if you recall from our phase 1 presentation, the state of Illinois guidelines for site size, all of your facilities were under the appropriate site size, at least as the state would define it. We've spoken with and met with the village and talked with zoning and really understand some of the impediments to expansion. It is not to say that expansion is not possible. It's just a question of scope and scale and how that could occur and how future ready could it be with that in mind. So we've shown additions today, right, at least schematically, conceptually. And so, but what is the effective, to covered woods, for example, which is a sort of an interesting shaped piece of land with streets on all sides and a little bit of outdoor space to one end. And so how much can we effectively make that transformation occur at that building given some of the constraints? And obviously stormwater is part and parcel to the conversation in this village and how you manage water and its conveyance through sites and things like that. So complicated answer, but we did look at that. We felt like whether it's 3 or 4 K5s, that there would be some impediments to the 3 K5s. And if you did the 4 K5s, we would have some enrollment issues. So it's just a question of from the core team's perspective, what made the most sense, at least as an initial presentation, and how that might move forward and evolve over time, I think is still available.
The short answer, I think, just to restate, is that the K-5 at the current sites, we're worried would get too large to be approved and go through the process. It would actually be too large, knowing what we've talked about with future ready spaces, Matt's example, 3 classes to 2, just how much space we'd actually need to add given the parcel of land. And then we did look at Skokie turning into a K-5 school as well as a 4th one. But then enrollment, you can do some math there. The more schools you divide the enrollment among, the harder it is to control for balancing your enrollment long term. So that's why that was studied. It was a popular one, but it was studied and ultimately was not an initial concept we presented.
Just have to say to the core team, I am really just tonight understanding the massive amount of information and data and possibilities and thoughts that you guys have had to organize and conceptualize to get to this point. I am so impressed. And truly, thank you. This is beyond. Really, I mean, it gives us something to work with, and we really appreciate it. This is what we were looking for. This is what we needed. Even though we sound like we're picking it apart, this is great.
And we're probably going to have 45 questions for a whole lot of other versions too.
Yeah, this is a great
I would
start.
just say thank you for saying that, and I would like, as a member of the core team for myself, like to thank the board for taking this on. Because when we started digging around and Kelly read that quote from the school board from 1965. Change is hard for all of us, and we've talked about that. And it's going to require a lot of collaborative work in the community. So thank you for taking it on.
Can I ask a timing question?
No.
So,
I just wonder.
I'll
I have
say,
a timing question myself.
my only question is, we do not have to make a decision in June if the core team and we don't think we have the answers. Do we? I mean, we want to get the right answer, not the fastest answer. And I'm thinking about the stormwater issue for the town, which has had a series of iterations. And I'd prefer to try to get it the way we want it the first time.
Right. I think we've said that about any process that we have, right? Is that we want to make sure that we have ultimately the right outcome. I think there is obviously a sense of urgency as well. We have a short-term plan in place. I want to recognize our families and teachers who are in the midst of that. So it's a delicate balance. And change is hard too. So you can also go to analysis to paralysis almost. So we want to hit that right balance, I think is what you're saying there. I do also want to recognize the enrollment balancing committee last year who looked at a very difficult challenge that we were facing and came to the conclusion that this is clearly not just enrollment, that there are facility concerns and limitations that only compound this. That are we, for so much change in this community potentially, are we really bringing added value to our schools and to teaching and learning? And so, they came forward with a difficult short-term solution, but the board then, as Kirby said, went ahead and gave the green light to put these pieces together, and probably one of the most complex challenges and processes we've had to face for some time here in this district. So we will continue to work together. I truly believe what I said earlier is that we will continue to listen and learn from one another and model a process that we'd be very proud of, especially for our children. And we're committed, we're available, we want to be out as early as this week. And I think this has been said a lot. I can't underscore the amount of time, even from Friday's presentation to today's, how much change has happened to make sure that this was a successful rollout of kind of the logical sequencing that the core team went through to get to the point they are today. So thank you.
Okay, so can we wrap it up, this part of it anyway? Had plenty of opportunity to ask other questions. Okay, so need to move on to public comment, which I have several people that have signed up. I don't know if I have all of it or not.
So I think for public comment, we're asking anybody wants to speak for public comment to come line up on the side over here, just so that we don't block anyone's view. Then you can come behind. I think Kate Hughes, our communications coordinator, is helping.
The podium is going to be public comment, so right over here. And then we're going to ask that someone is in the on-deck circle and then in the hole along the wall.
So the first person I have is Rob Daniels.
again, if you are interested in public comment, please come to the side over here. Thank you.
Rob Daniels, 491 Elder Lane. I'll make this quick. It's been a fantastic presentation. I just am so grateful to the effort and time that everyone's put in. And everyone says that exact same sentence. We'll all be here even longer. So what I really want to commend the team for doing, as educators really should, is not jumping to answers, but jumping to questions. And I think you guys did a fantastic job of asking some very difficult but important questions. When you evaluate the different options, one question that came to my mind is, with each option, we gain things and we lose things. So what specifically are we gaining, and what specifically are we losing? My daughter had the pleasure of going to Skokie School with Kelly Tessa's arrival, and while she loves Washburn, she misses Skokie. And I think as students transition, the fact that we're losing those transitions is a benefit. It has an educational benefit, it has a social emotional benefit, but I'm also wondering, as we lose neighborhood schools, and we think about what benefits do we gain from losing a neighborhood school, and what risks do we take from losing them as well? This is sort of a 1950s era neighborhood with these neighborhood schools. My son walks to school. He's in 3rd grade. He rides his bike. He feels independent. He's a leader. He has a kindergarten buddy. And when he is the youngest at a 3 through 8 building, he'll lose that. And when we sit in a carpool line in these wonderfully drawn driveways, we'll lose that as well. When a 2nd grader observes misbehavior in a 4th grader, that's about the worst behaved kid they're going to encounter during the day. When they observe a misbehaving 8th grader, the administrative response is going to be a little different, knowing that that 8th grader is doing a perfectly normal 8th grader thing, but not in front of a 2nd grader. You just can't do that. And so the amount of tolerance we have for our older students as they make adolescent transgressions is also a concern. I'm running out of time. These are difficult and important questions, and I think if you could just balance what is the impact on discipline, social emotional learning, academic learning, safety, sort of the neighborhood character of Winnetka. These are so many issues that need to be impacted. And it's not just what do we gain with the Future Ready, but also what do we lose from the neighborhood school. Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen Ziv.
Will you call the next two as well so they can line up?
Oh, I've got Kristen Ziv, then is it Brian Ziv? And then I'm going to butcher these names. Kate. Did you?
Is it Steve? Kate Clinton.
Steve Juliuson, maybe? Phil Huss. You guys have to write better. I'm going to butcher your names. Phil Huss and Nora Shea. That one I can read.
If you're still in the auditorium and you signed up, will you go to the wall and we'll do it that way? So if you signed up for public comment, just go over, Kate, raise your hand.
Okay. No, I think everybody's staying in their seats. Okay. That's fine if they wanted to come over and
Anybody
talk.
still wants to talk? Just line up like Kate?
No. We were expecting
That saved a lot of time.
more than one comment, so.
It's been the way I've been.
That's a lot to digest.
Okay, so are we ready to, can I have a motion to approve these? And then all in favor?